Today we are digging into a fascinating legal battle out of the Philippines. And on the surface, yeah, it's about some factory machines. But if you look a little closer, it tells this universal story about what happens when you pour your heart, your soul, and, your assets into a company. It really makes you ask, at what point does my stuff become the company's stuff? So let me ask you this. Imagine you start a company. You put in your own equipment just to get it off the ground. Years go by and you're on your way out. Can you just take that equipment back with you? I mean, it seems simple enough, right? Well, the answer is way more complicated than you might think. And in this case, it led to a legal fight that lasted a decade. Okay, so here's how we're going to unpack this whole thing. We'll start with the founder and his claim, then we'll look at the controversial letter at the very center of it all. We'll ride the legal roller coaster through the lower courts, get the final word from the Supreme Court, and then we'll crack the legal code to see why they ruled the way they did, and most importantly, what it means for you. All right, so let's meet the man at the center of our story, Ryuichi Yamamoto. He's a Japanese national who comes to the Philippines and starts his own leather tanning company. This was his baby, built with his own investments, including some very specific and very valuable machinery. Now, what's really wild here is just how fast the power shifted. In just a handful of years, Yamamoto goes from being the sole founder to a minority shareholder. And the company, well, it doesn't even have his name on it anymore. This is the backdrop for the buyout negotiations, and you can just feel the conflict brewing. So right in the middle of these buyout talks, a letter gets sent from Nishino's lawyer. And this wasn't just some random piece of mail. This one letter would become the single most important piece of evidence in the whole case. And it was interpreted in two completely different ways. For Yamamoto, this was it. This was the promise. He saw that line, "You may take them out with you," and thought, okay, green light. I mean, it seems pretty direct, doesn't it? So based on this letter, he tried to go get the machinery that he had originally put into the business. And this right here, this is the whole case in a nutshell. A total disconnect. Yamamoto sees a binding contract. Nishino, on the other hand, sees it as just one small part of a much bigger, unfinalized deal. Just a proposal, something that would still need official sign-off from the board. So, when Nishino's company physically blocked Yamamoto from taking the machines, Yamamoto sued. And that's what kicked this whole thing off. All right, so now the fight heads to the courtroom, and this is where it gets messy. This was not an open and shut case. The first trip through the legal system was a classic back and forth that just made everything even more confusing. And talk about legal whiplash. First, the trial court sides with Yamamoto. They declare him the owner. Victory, right? But then Nishino appeals, and the Court of Appeals completely flips the script. They say, nope, the machines belong to the corporation. So now you have two different courts with two totally opposite answers. The only place left to go? The Supreme Court. After years of fighting and these conflicting rulings, the case finally lands with the justices of the Philippine Supreme Court. It was up to them to have the final say on who owned the machines and what that controversial letter really meant. And the verdict? Wow, it was decisive. The Supreme Court denied Yamamoto's petition. The machines were not his. They belonged to the corporation. End of story. But why? I mean, why? This is where it gets really, really interesting. The court didn't just pick a side. They broke this case down using three huge principles of corporate law that, honestly, every entrepreneur or investor needs to understand. So, first and foremost, the court leaned on this massive idea. The corporate shield. Basically, a corporation is its own legal person. Think of it like a wall between the owner and the business itself. The second Yamamoto put his machines into the company as his investment, they legally stopped being his. They became the property of this new legal person, Nishino Leather Industries. Now, Yamamoto argued that Nishino had total control, so the court should just ignore that shield, or pierce the corporate veil, as they say in legal circles. But the court said, hold on. To do that, you have to pass this really strict three-part test. And here's the key. It's not enough to just prove someone is in charge. And right there, that's where Yamamoto's whole argument fell apart. That second part of the test. The court looked and said, we don't see any proof that Nishino used his control to commit fraud or do something unjust to Yamamoto. Without that piece, the corporate shield stays up and the company's property stays the company's property. Then, the court looked at the letter itself again. They pointed out that it ended with the phrase, "Kindly let me know of your comments." And that little phrase, they said, changes everything. It turns the letter from a binding promise into a simple offer. It was a proposal on the table, not a finished deal. And since there was no proof Yamamoto ever formally accepted it, there was no contract. And finally, the court brought out this really powerful idea called the trust fund doctrine. The easiest way to think about it is like this. All of a company's assets are in a locked piggy bank. And the law says the very first people who get a key to that bank are the creditors, the people the company owes money to. You can't just let a stockholder come along, smash it open, and walk away with the cash, because that could leave everyone else with nothing. So after all that legal theory, what's the actual lesson here? This isn't just one guy's story, it's a really stark reminder about the fundamental rules of the business world. So here's the bottom line. The second you put an asset into your company as capital, it is no longer yours. That corporate shield we talked about, it's real and it is very hard to break. All that talk during negotiations isn't a contract, and a company's assets are legally locked up to protect its creditors above anyone else.
And this leaves us with this really profound question for any entrepreneur, right? It's so easy to see your company as just an extension of yourself. But in the eyes of the law, it's a completely separate being. And this case shows us that the line between the founder and their company isn't drawn by passion or effort, but by the cold, hard logic of corporate law.